What if I told you that in the heart of Lagos, a simple loaf of bread carried on a young woman's head became the doorway to a life she never imagined? This isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of how one act of kindness in a single afternoon changed everything. Stay with me till the end, because what unfolds will warm your heart and inspire your soul. And before we dive deep, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. The air carried the noise of early morning traffic as people hurried across the city of Lagos, each chasing after something. Among the swarm of voices and footsteps, a young woman balanced a tray of bread on her head. She had done this so many mornings that her feet already knew the cracks on the road, the uneven pavements, and the familiar turns leading toward the market. Her name was Sade. Her dress was simple, faded at the edges from too many washes, yet she wore it with a dignity that made her stand out. The bread she carried was all she had for the day's survival. If she sold them, there would be enough for food, maybe transport, maybe rent. If not, she would sleep hungry. Still, she carried herself with an unusual calm, as though something deep inside told her she had more than bread to offer. On this particular morning, she stopped at a traffic light where cars rolled in, horns blasting, drivers peering out impatiently. She moved carefully between them, her soft voice rising above the noise as she called out her wares. Some ignored her, some waved her away. Yet she smiled at each person she saw. It was not the kind of smile one wore out of habit, it was the kind that carried warmth, like a gentle reminder that kindness still existed even in a city that never slowed down. One car window rolled down, and a man in a press suit leaned out, scowling at the endless weight of the traffic. He looked at her as though she were invisible. But she greeted him, her tone polite, not forcing, not begging. He shook his head. She nodded gently, still offering that small spark of humanity in the middle of chaos. She turned to the next car, still unshaken, still carrying herself with hope. The day dragged, the sun climbed higher, sweat traced her forehead, but she kept going. Some bread sold, but not enough. She walked with the tray, legs aching, yet her spirit unbroken. At a corner near a busy junction, she saw a young boy sitting on the ground, his shirt torn, his eyes tired. He looked at the bread the way the hungry look at food, not with words, but with longing too heavy to hide. Sade paused. She thought of her own empty stomach waiting at home. Every piece of bread mattered. Yet she bent down slowly, lifted one piece, and handed it to the boy. No speeches, no hesitation, just a simple gesture. The boy's face lit up, his small hands clutching the bread as though it was treasure. He whispered a thank you, his voice breaking, and she smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been all day. She straightened, adjusted the tray, and kept walking. She didn't know anyone was watching. But someone had seen her. In a city filled with noise and indifference, a pair of eyes had noticed what others ignored. What she gave away without thinking was about to return to her in a way she could never have imagined. That moment, ordinary to her, planted the seed of something extraordinary. Evening was beginning to fold itself over the city when Sade reached the last stretch of her route. The air was heavy with the scent of roasted corn from roadside stalls, mixed with the smoke of keek engines weaving through the road. Her tray was lighter, but not empty, and in her mind she calculated what the sales could cover. A little for Gary, maybe a little for kerosene, but the money would not stretch far. As she walked, her thoughts returned to the boy she had given bread to. His face would not leave her mind. The way his eyes had widened, how his lips trembled with relief. She wondered where he slept at night, who cared for him, if anyone even called his name. The memory softened her tiredness, even if hunger was beginning to press against her ribs. At a bus stop, she adjusted her tray and leaned against a rail, just to rest her feet. People rushed past her, dragging bags, shouting to conductors, their steps quick, their voices urgent. No one noticed her pause, no one noticed the way her body sagged for a moment. But then a voice spoke from behind her. "Young lady," the voice called gently. She turned. A man stood there, his suit still neat despite the long day. His car was parked a little distance away, a black sedan that shone under the fading light. She recognized him. It was the same man who had waved her away earlier at the traffic light. Now his eyes were softer, his expression less impatient. "I saw what you did," he said. His tone was calm, deliberate. Sade frowned, uncertain. "Sir." "The boy," he said. "You gave him bread when you could have sold it. You didn't ask for anything in return. You didn't even look around to see if someone was watching. You just gave." Heat rose to her cheeks. She didn't know what to say. To her, it had been nothing, just a small act. To him, it seemed to mean more. "I've seen many people at that junction," the man continued. "Most pretend not to notice children like him. But you noticed. That's rare." Sade lowered her eyes, gripping the tray tighter. She felt both exposed and confused. Why was this stranger speaking to her as though she had done something remarkable? The man stepped closer. "What's your name?" She hesitated. In Lagos, names were not given to strangers easily, but something in his voice felt steady, not threatening. "Sade," she said finally. He nodded. "I'm Adiwale. And I think today was not just about selling bread for you. Today might be something bigger." She tilted her head, unsure what he meant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. It was simple, with his name printed boldly, and a company logo she did not recognize. "I run a firm," he explained. "We're always looking for people with character. Skill can be taught, but kindness is not something you learn in a classroom. I don't usually stop like this, but something about you tells me I shouldn't walk away." Sade's heart pounded. She wanted to laugh it off, wanted to believe this was just talk. How could a bread seller matter to a man like this? Yet his eyes stayed on hers, steady, sincere. "I want you to come to my office tomorrow," he said. "Just come. Bring nothing but yourself." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was not sure what to say. Her world was small: wake early, balance the tray, sell bread, count coins. This invitation was something from another world entirely. "Sir, I don't think I fit where you're talking about," she murmured. He smiled, a smile not of pity, but of belief. "You fit more than you know. Just come." He placed the card gently on her tray, nodded once, and walked back toward his car. She watched as the sedan merged into traffic, swallowed by the sea of vehicles. The card sat there among the bread, gleaming faintly under the streetlight. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She read the letters once, twice, 3 times, as if they would vanish if she blinked too long. A part of her wanted to throw it away, afraid it was a dream she had no right to hold. Another part clutched it tightly, as though it carried the weight of tomorrow. That night, in her small room where the ceiling leaked and the mattress sagged, Sade lay awake. The card rested beside her, its edges catching the faint glow of her lantern. She thought of her mother's words from long ago, how small acts, even unnoticed, could change the path of a life. She thought of the boy's hungry eyes, of Adiwale's steady voice, of the strange way fate had twisted itself around a single gesture. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried her into dreams where she was no longer just a girl selling bread on the roadside. In those dreams, she was stepping into something she could not yet name, something vast and unfamiliar, but filled with light. And as dawn prepared to break over Lagos once again, Sade did not know that her next 24 hours would rewrite everything she thought she knew about herself. The morning broke quietly in her small room. A thin streak of light slipped through the window, painting the cracked wall. Sade lay awake long before the city stirred. Her mind refused to rest, circling around that card lying on the wooden stool beside her bed. The bold letters printed on it still felt foreign to her world, almost unreal. She touched it gently, as if it might crumble into dust if she pressed too hard. Her tray of bread was ready. That was the rhythm of her life: wake, fetch the loaves, step into the endless stream of faces and voices, and hope to return with coins heavy enough to survive another day. But today was not like the others. Today, her hands shook with a choice that weighed more than the tray itself. Should she risk going to that address? Should she dare to believe the man's words? She carried the tray out anyway, because hunger still waited, and she could not gamble on dreams. The streets were alive again, conductors yelling routes, sellers hawking wares, children weaving between feet. The city always demanded speed, but Sade walked slower than usual, lost in her thoughts. As she reached her usual spot near the traffic light, she saw him again, the little boy from yesterday. His face was smeared with dust, but when his eyes met hers, they lit up with recognition. He raised the piece of bread he had saved, though stale now, as though showing her proof that he had not forgotten her kindness. Her lips curved into a small smile. Something about the sight steadied her heart. She knelt to meet him. "Did you eat?" she asked softly. He nodded, clutching the bread tighter. For a moment, silence passed between them, heavy but gentle. In that silence, Sade realized why she couldn't let fear stop her. If a small act could carry this much meaning to one child, then maybe stepping into that unknown office could carry even more for her own life. She sold some bread through the morning, coins clinking into her pouch, but her eyes kept drifting to the card tucked carefully in her wrapper. Finally, she could not ignore the pull anymore. She adjusted her tray, handed it over to a friend at the stall nearby, and whispered, "Please help me watch this. I need to go somewhere." Her legs carried her nervously across roads she rarely walked. The further she went, the taller the buildings became, the wider the streets opened. When she finally stood before the glass building with the logo from the card, her heart thudded so loudly she thought passers-by might hear. The doors reflected her face back at her, a girl in a plain dress, holding nothing but courage she wasn't sure she had. Inside, the air was cool, polished floors shining beneath her feet. She felt every pair of eyes on her as she approached the reception desk. The woman there looked up, elegant in her fitted suit, her voice smooth. "Good morning, how may I help you?" Sade swallowed. I came to see Mr. Adiwale. He asked me to come." Her voice was low but steady. The receptionist's brow arched slightly, but she picked up the phone and dialed. After a brief exchange, she nodded. "You may go up. 11th floor. He's expecting you." Sade stepped into the elevator, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. As the numbers climbed, her mind swirled with doubts. What if it was a mistake? What if she embarrassed herself? The bell chimed, the doors slid open, and there he was, Adiwale, standing in the hallway as if he had been waiting all morning. His smile was warm. "You came," he said simply. She nodded, unable to find words. "Come with me," he gestured, leading her into his office. The room was wide, with shelves stacked neatly, the city skyline visible through tall windows. It was a world far from the streets she knew. "Sit," he said kindly. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the leather chair, her back straight, her fingers clasping her lap. "I don't know what you're thinking right now," Adiwale began. "Maybe you doubt why I called you here. Maybe you think this is too big for you. But let me tell you why. Yesterday, I saw something rare. In a city where people are always rushing, where kindness is often swallowed by survival, I saw you give without expecting anything. That kind of heart," he paused, "is what I want around me." Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back quickly. "I run projects that go beyond money," he continued. "We reach communities, we support families, we try to remind people that compassion still matters. And I think you could help. You might say you have no degree, no experience, but none of that matters to me right now. What matters is what I saw." Sade's chest rose and fell quickly. She had never imagined her small act being seen this way. She had never imagined someone would call her into a space like this. "What do you say?" he asked gently. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can, but I will try." Adiwale smiled again, this time broader. "That's all I need." He stood, reached for a drawer, and brought out a small brown envelope. He slid it across the table. "This is for today. Think of it as your first step. Tomorrow, you'll come again. We'll take it from there." Her fingers hesitated before touching the envelope. When she finally opened it, her breath caught. Inside were bills, more than she had ever held in her hands at once. Her throat tightened, words fleeing from her tongue. "You earned it the moment you gave that boy bread," Adiwale said softly. "The world noticed." Tears broke free then, running silently down her cheeks. She pressed the envelope against her chest, unable to speak, unable to believe. For the first time in her life, Sade felt that maybe the world was not as closed to her as she thought. Maybe her story was not meant to end at the roadside with a tray of bread. And as she stepped out of that office, clutching the envelope, the city around her seemed different, still noisy, still crowded, but no longer just a place of survival. It had become a place of possibility. What awaited her in the next hours would be more than she could ever imagine. The afternoon sun pressed down on the city as Sade stepped back onto the street, clutching the envelope close to her chest. The world around her moved with the same urgency as before, hawkers shouting, buses screeching, drivers leaning on their horns. Yet, for her, everything felt different. She wasn't just another bread seller lost in the crowd anymore. She was carrying a secret, a new door opening before her, and it weighed heavier than the tray she had left behind. Her feet carried her slowly back toward the stall where she had left her bread. Her friend, Kimi, waved when she saw her approaching. "Ah, Sade! Where did you vanish to? Customers came and went, I even helped you sell some." Sade smiled faintly, though her mind was far away. She handed the tray back, still clutching the envelope. Kimi's eyes fell on it curiously. "What's that? Who gave you?" Sade shook her head quickly. "Later," she whispered, unwilling to unwrap the mystery just yet. She hurried home, weaving through the streets, her heart pounding at the thought of opening the envelope again in private. Inside her small room, she shut the wooden door behind her, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. She placed the envelope on the bed, staring at it as though it might vanish if she blinked. When she finally opened it again, the note seemed to gleam in the dim light of her lantern. She counted with trembling fingers, her voice breaking into soft gasps. It was more than she could make in weeks of selling bread, more than her hands had ever touched at once. Her first thought was her mother. Though gone now, her mother's words always lingered, "Kindness never dies. It finds its way back." Those words echoed as Sade sat on the edge of her bed, holding the money, realizing it was her mother's lesson that had led her to this very moment. That night, she bought food from a nearby vendor, not just for herself, but for the boy she had met at the junction. She searched for him, and when she found him huddled by a wall, his small body curled into itself, she placed the steaming parcel into his hands. His eyes widened again, but this time, tears rolled freely down his face. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Sade sat beside him on the ground, ignoring the stares of passers-by. She watched as he tore into the food, her heart swelling with a warmth she couldn't explain. For once, she didn't feel like she was only giving, she felt like she was receiving something back, something larger than food, larger than money. When she returned home, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the envelope tucked safely beneath her pillow. Tomorrow, she would step into that office again. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that still felt like a dream. The next morning, she rose early, the tray of bread waiting as usual. But she looked at it differently now. It was no longer her only future, it was a part of her past that had led her to where she stood. She tied her scarf neatly, wore her cleanest dress, and tucked the card into her wrapper. She carried herself with a quiet determination as she made her way back to the glass building. When she arrived, Adiwale was already waiting. He greeted her warmly, as though he had known her for years, not just a day. "Good," he said, his voice steady. "You came back. That means you're ready." He led her through the office, introducing her to people who looked at her with curiosity but also respect, because anyone personally brought in by Adiwale carried weight. She was given a seat at a table, papers placed before her, instructions spoken slowly so she could follow. At first, her hands shook, her eyes darting nervously as she tried to keep up. But Adiwale's calm voice anchored her. You don't need to be perfect, he reminded her. You just need to be willing. Through the day, she learned small tasks, organizing files, writing notes, listening to conversations about projects she could hardly believe were real. They spoke of schools being built, families receiving help, children being given hope. It was as though she had stepped into a world where kindness was not only noticed, but multiplied. During lunch, Adiwale sat with her. Do you understand why you're here? He asked gently. She hesitated. Because I gave bread to a boy. He smiled. Yes. But more than that, because you showed heart when no one was watching. That is the kind of person I want near me. Money can buy skill, but it cannot buy character. And you, Sade, carry something rare. His words settled deep inside her. She thought of all the mornings she had walked the streets unseen, her voice drowned in the noise of the city. Now, someone was telling her she was not invisible. By evening, when she left the building, her steps were lighter than they had ever been. She did not carry the tray that day, but she carried something far greater, a sense that her life was shifting. Back at her room, she opened the envelope again, touching the money, but realizing that what mattered most was not the notes themselves. It was the chance to step into something new, the chance to write a story she had never believed belonged to her. And as she lay down that night, a quiet thought whispered in her heart. In less than 24 hours, her world had begun to turn in ways she never imagined possible. Yet she also knew, this was only the beginning. The city was alive with the usual morning noise, yet for Sade, everything felt strangely new. The same buses honked, the same vendors shouted prices into the air, but her heart moved at a different rhythm now. She wasn't only carrying bread anymore, she was carrying the weight of possibility. And it frightened her as much as it thrilled her. Her routine had always been predictable. Wake up, balance the tray, step into the streets, sell what she could, return home with coins jingling faintly in her pouch. But now, she woke with something else waiting for her, an office, a man who believed in her, and a world she had never imagined for herself. She stood before the tray, staring at it for a long while. It had been her companion through hard days, her reason to push through hunger, her shield against hopelessness. For a moment, she wondered if leaving it behind meant abandoning the part of her that had shaped her strength. But then she touched it gently, as if whispering goodbye to an old friend. She covered it with a cloth and left it on the small table. Today, she chose a different path. The walk to the office was longer than she remembered. Every step was filled with questions. Would they accept her again? Would she fail at tasks too difficult? What if she disappointed Adiwale? But beneath all the doubts, a small flame of courage burned. She had come this far, and something deep inside told her she could not turn back now. At the building, she was greeted differently this time. The receptionist smiled, recognizing her. Good morning, Sade. 11th floor, right? Her voice carried warmth, not the guarded politeness of yesterday. Sade's chest swelled with a quiet pride as she nodded, stepping into the elevator. When the doors opened, Adiwale was there once more, not behind his desk but waiting in the hallway. It surprised her. Important men didn't wait for bread sellers, but he did. You're early, he said, his smile easy. I didn't want to waste time, she replied softly. Good, he nodded. Come. There's something I want you to see. He led her past offices filled with busy faces, past shelves stacked with documents, into a conference room where a large map was spread across the table. Red markers dotted the surface, each one labeled with a community name. These are the areas we support, Adiwale explained. Schools, clinics, feeding programs. Every dot is a place where lives are being changed. But behind every effort are people who carry it, not for the pay, not for recognition, but because they care. People like you. Her breath caught. The map seemed enormous, like a living thing. She had never left Lagos, yet here were names of places she had only heard in passing. And now, she was standing at a table where decisions were made about them. He handed her a notebook. I want you to start learning. You'll sit with the team, listen, write what you observe. Don't worry about knowing everything. Just watch with the same heart you had when you gave that boy bread. The day unfolded with voices filling the room. People spoke of budgets, supplies, timelines, and challenges. At first, the words flew past her, strange and heavy. She scribbled what she could, her handwriting shaky, her mind straining to keep up. But as hours passed, she began to catch pieces that mattered. She listened not just with her ears, but with her heart. When someone spoke about children walking miles barefoot to school, she imagined the boy from the junction. When they spoke of mothers struggling to feed their families, she remembered her own mother's weary eyes. Each story stitched itself into her like fabric woven into her skin. During a break, one of the staff leaned over and whispered, "You're new, right? Don't worry. It feels too much at first, but you'll get it." There was no mockery in her voice, only encouragement. For the first time, Sade felt she wasn't just tolerated, she was welcomed. By afternoon, Adewale called her into his office again. He poured her a glass of water, the gesture simple yet kind. "Tell me, what did you notice today?" She hesitated, clutching the notebook. "I noticed that everyone speaks about numbers and plans. But behind those numbers are people. Children, mothers, fathers. Sometimes, I think people forget to see the faces." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's exactly why you're here. We need eyes that see more than figures. We need someone who remembers the faces." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "I don't know if I have what it takes, sir. But I'll try." He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Sade, trying is already more than most do. That's why I chose you. You remind me of something many of us forget." She left the office that evening with her chest light but her eyes damp. The streets were the same, but to her, they no longer looked like walls closing in, they looked like paths opening outward. When she reached home, she placed the envelope beside her pillow again, but she didn't count the money this time. She didn't need to. For the first time, she felt wealth not in notes, but in purpose. As night wrapped around the city, Sade whispered into the darkness, as if speaking to her mother's spirit. "I think something is changing, Mama. I don't know where this road will lead, but I'm ready to follow it." The city hummed outside, restless and alive, but inside her little room, Sade felt a stillness she had never known before. She closed her eyes, and in her heart, she knew, her life had stepped beyond survival and into a story unfolding faster than she could keep up. And this story, she realized, was only beginning to reveal its true weight. Morning came again with a golden haze spilling across the streets of Lagos. Sade woke early, but this time, she felt a quiet strength within her. The city's noise, the cars, the shouting vendors, the distant wails of street children, was no longer something to survive. It was a rhythm she moved within, aware that her own steps now carried purpose. She didn't carry her tray of bread that morning. The small table in her room looked almost symbolic, as if the bread itself had been a stepping stone to something greater. She smoothed the cloth over it, a silent gesture of respect for the life it had given her so far. She dressed simply, neatly, her hands careful with the card and the envelope tucked safely in her wrapper. Today, she would meet Adewale again, and today, she felt more ready than ever. The walk to the office was quiet, but her mind buzzed. She replayed every moment from the last day, the map of communities, the stories of struggling families, the faces of children walking miles to school. Her heart ached and swelled simultaneously, and she realized she had never felt so alive. She felt accountable now, not just to herself, but to the people whose lives were represented by red dots on that map. At the building, the receptionist greeted her warmly, a small smile on her face. 11th floor, right? Sade nodded, stepping into the elevator. She felt the hum of the lift beneath her feet, the walls reflecting her determined expression. When the doors opened, Adewale was already there, not behind his desk this time, but waiting near the window, looking out over the city. He turned as she approached, and his eyes lit with recognition. "You're early," he said simply, but there was warmth in his tone. "I didn't want to waste time," she replied, feeling steadier now. "Good. Today, I want you to see more than numbers," he said. "I want you to understand why we do what we do. You'll meet some of the families whose lives we touch." Sade's stomach twisted with nervous excitement. She had never stepped into homes like those she had helped, never walked among people who depended on the kindness of strangers. The city had always felt too big, too indifferent, but now she was being invited inside. They left the building together, getting into a sleek car that felt foreign to her hands. As they drove through the streets, Adewale spoke quietly. "Many people only see the struggles. They forget the resilience, the hope. Today, you will see both." Their first stop was a small community on the outskirts, a cluster of simple homes made of tin and wood. Children played barefoot in dusty yards, their laughter carrying through the air despite the cracks in the walls around them. Mothers swept doorways, carrying babies on their backs, eyes alert and tired. Fathers sat quietly, hands calloused from labor, heads bowed in quiet determination. Sade felt an overwhelming rush of emotion. These were real lives, real stories, not the abstract names on a map. She stepped down from the car carefully, her eyes absorbing everything: the smiles, the exhaustion, the tiny victories of survival. A woman approached, a folder in her hand. "Mr. Adewale, this is the family from the scholarship program. Their youngest, Cheka, has been struggling to attend school regularly." Sade knelt to meet Cheka's eyes, and the boy looked up at her, wary at first, then slowly curious. She offered a small smile, and he returned it tentatively. In that moment, the same spark she had felt with the boy from the street yesterday ignited again. Over the next hour, she met more families, listened to their stories, and watched as Adewale spoke to each of them with patience, care, and respect. Sade began taking notes, scribbling down observations, questions, and ideas. She realized that this was more than charity, it was connection, understanding, and commitment. At one home, a young girl offered her a small piece of paper with a drawing. It depicted a woman standing tall with bread in her hands and a small boy reaching up. Sade's throat tightened. She had never been recognized in this way before. Back in the car, Adewale glanced at her. "Do you see why you're here?" "Yes," she whispered. "It's not just about giving, it's about seeing, really seeing." He nodded. "Exactly. People often overlook the eyes behind the struggles. That's what you bring, eyes that notice." The afternoon was a blur of homes, streets, and stories. Each visit left her exhausted but exhilarated. By the time they returned to the office, her hands ached from writing, her legs from walking, but her heart was full in a way she had never known. Adewale handed her a folder. "I want you to start compiling these stories. Not for the office alone, but for the people. We want their voices to be heard beyond these streets." Sade stared at the papers, then back at him. I can do that." "You already have," he said. "You just didn't know it yet." That evening, when she returned home, Sade didn't touch the bread on the table. Instead, she opened the folder and began organizing her notes, writing down each family's story with care. She felt a strange kind of pride, a quiet joy that no coins could buy. As night settled, the city lights flickered through her window, and she whispered into the dark, "I think I'm finally starting to understand. This is bigger than me, but I can be part of it." For the first time, Sade slept not with worry, but with purpose. She dreamed of the faces she had seen, of the hands she had held, and of the endless possibilities that had opened with a single act of kindness. And deep down, she knew that this journey was far from over. Tomorrow would bring challenges, decisions, and moments that would demand every ounce of her courage. Yet, for the first time in her life, she welcomed them. The sun was barely awake when Sade rose the next morning, a quiet anticipation settling over her like a soft cloak. The city had begun to stir, distant horns and shouts floating up from the streets below, but inside her small room, the world felt still, almost sacred. She touched the tray of bread with a reverence that surprised her. It had been her life for so long, her constant companion, her survival, yet now it felt like a relic of a chapter she had outgrown. She didn't need it today. She dressed carefully, tucking the envelope and the card safely into her wrapper. Her notebook of family stories lay beside them, pages slightly crumpled from late-night scribbles, but brimming with life. She touched the cover gently, thinking of the families she had met, of Chika's shy smile, of the girl's drawing that had made her heart ache with unexpected joy. Today, she would continue learning, continue seeing, and perhaps start shaping the path she had never imagined for herself. The streets were alive in the usual way, but to Sade, they felt like a stage, every sound and movement carrying meaning she had never noticed before. She walked swiftly, stepping carefully over cracks and debris, avoiding puddles left by the night's rain. Her mind rehearsed what she might say, what she might do, but deep down she knew that this day could not be planned, it would unfold, and she would have to meet it fully awake. At the office, Adewale was waiting for her, leaning against the window with his usual calm expression. "You're punctual," he said, his smile easy. "I didn't want to be late," she replied. "Good. Today is about more than listening. Today, you'll take part." Sade's stomach fluttered. She had been an observer, a recorder of stories, a silent witness. But today, she would step into action. She followed Adewale out of the building and into the car, her pulse quickening. The city passed in a blur of color and noise, but her mind focused on the families she would meet, the children whose lives were fragile yet luminous, the parents carrying burdens she could barely imagine. Their first stop was a neighborhood hit hard by recent floods. Homes were damaged, streets muddy, and the air smelled of wet earth and smoke from small cooking fires. Families huddled in makeshift shelters, faces lined with worry, eyes alert and watchful. Sade felt a pang of fear. This was raw, unfiltered hardship. She had seen poverty before, but seeing it so close, seeing the worry etched in every line of a mother's face, made her heart ache. Adewale introduced her to a family with 3 children, their home partially collapsed. The mother clutched a blanket to her chest, holding her youngest tightly, while the older children looked at Sade with cautious curiosity. "This is Sade," Adewale said softly. "She will be helping today, learning how we support families like yours." Sade knelt carefully, bringing herself to the children's level. She smiled, and the eldest boy returned it tentatively. "Hi," she said gently. "My name is Sade. I'm here to help." The boy's lips twitched into a small smile. "Are you really going to help us?" "Yes," she said firmly. "We'll make sure you have food, school supplies, and help to repair your home." The mother's eyes glistened. You're very kind," she whispered. Sade's throat tightened. Kindness had never felt like this heavy before, responsibility layered over compassion, a promise that she had to keep. She helped distribute supplies, carrying bundles of food and blankets alongside Adewale's team. She watched as smiles slowly returned to the children's faces, laughter threading through the tense air like fragile music. By midday, Sade was exhausted, but her exhaustion was different now. It was the kind that comes from meaningful work, from giving fully and seeing the impact. She sat briefly on a step, wiping sweat from her brow, and watched as Adewale coordinated efforts, moving with precision but never losing warmth. "You're doing well," he said, kneeling beside her. "Notice how the smallest gestures make the biggest difference." Sade nodded. "I see it. It's incredible." Adewale smiled. "This is why you're here. You have the heart to see what others overlook." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity, counting supplies, talking to parents, helping children with homework, documenting needs. Sade felt herself expanding with every interaction, every word, every smile returned. She realized that this work was not about grandeur or recognition, it was about presence, attention, and care. As evening approached, they visited one final home. A little girl, no older than 7, ran toward Sade, clutching a small clay doll. "Look," she said, holding it out. I made it for you. Sade crouched down, taking the doll carefully. It's beautiful, she said softly. Thank you for sharing it with me. The girl's eyes shone. You help us. You care. Sade felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never expected such pure acknowledgement. All her days of struggle, all the hours spent balancing bread on her head, all the small acts of kindness she had given, everything had led to this moment, where her heart could meet another's and feel recognized, valued, and understood. When they returned to the office, Adewale handed her another folder. Start planning initiatives for tomorrow, he said. Use what you learned today. Think of ways to make this better. Sade sat at her desk late into the night, writing, organizing, dreaming. She scribbled notes, sketched ideas, planned small projects, each thought brimming with possibility. For the first time, she saw herself not as a girl surviving, but as a woman creating change. That night, when she returned home, the city had quieted, but her mind remained alive. She opened the envelope once more, not for the money, but as a reminder of the leap she had taken, the trust she had been given, the life she was beginning to craft. She whispered into the darkness, Mama, I think I finally understand. Every small act matters. And now, I have to keep giving. Sade lay down, exhausted yet exhilarated. For the first time, she felt the weight of the world not as a burden, but as a canvas. And in the silent hum of the city, she dreamed not of survival, but of transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, new lessons, but for the first time in her life, Sade was ready to meet them fully awake. Morning broke differently that day. The sun's light seeped through her window with a quiet insistence, as though it too knew something extraordinary was waiting. Sade rose slowly, her body still tired from the previous days, yet her spirit thrummed with a fierce energy she had never felt before. She glanced at the tray of bread resting quietly on the table, untouched for days. It was no longer a lifeline, it was a memory, a reminder of where she had started. Today, she carried something far greater, purpose. She dressed carefully, tucking the envelope and the card into her wrapper, along with her notebook filled with stories, ideas, and plans. Each page was a testament to the lives she had touched and the lessons she had learned. Her hands lingered on it for a moment, as though drawing strength from the collection of faces and voices she had gathered. Walking through the streets of Lagos, everything seemed sharper, clearer, as though the city itself was alive with opportunity. She noticed the small details she had once overlooked, the old man struggling to carry a heavy sack, the young girl balancing a pot of water on her head, the vendor arranging tomatoes with care. She imagined each one's story, each one's hidden struggles, and felt an unfamiliar sense of responsibility. She was no longer merely observing the city, she was part of it, and it was part of her. At the office, Adewale was waiting, as always, but this time there was a different air about him. He looked at her not just as someone being taught, but as someone who could contribute, someone whose presence mattered. Sade, he said, today is different. Today, you won't just witness change, you'll lead it. Her pulse quickened. Lead it? She swallowed hard, feeling both exhilaration and fear. I'll try, sir, she said quietly. He nodded. Trying is the first step. Come with me. They drove to a community on the outskirts, a neighborhood recently devastated by storms. Homes were damaged, streets flooded, and families displaced. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and smoke from small cooking fires. Children ran barefoot through the mud, some laughing despite their hardships, others watching quietly from doorways. Mothers balanced babies on their backs, eyes alert, cautious. Fathers moved with care, checking what little they could salvage. Adewale turned to Sade. Today, you decide what needs to happen here. You have seen, you have listened. Now, you'll act. Her heart raced. She had observed, taken notes, planned, but leading? It felt monumental. Yet, as she stepped from the car, something within her settled. She thought of the boy she had given bread to, of the families she had met, of the quiet power of noticing. And in that moment, she realized that leadership wasn't about knowing everything, it was about caring enough to do something. Sade walked through the mud with the team, assessing the needs. She organized the distribution of food, blankets, and school supplies, instructing volunteers with a steady voice she hadn't known she possessed. She spoke with mothers about rebuilding their homes, asking questions, listening to their needs, and ensuring their voices guided the team's actions. She guided children to safe spaces, watched them laugh, and reminded herself that every small gesture mattered. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Sade felt her body ache, her hands blistered from lifting supplies, her feet soaked from the mud. Yet she never stopped, never faltered. Each smile she received, each tear she helped wipe away, strengthened her resolve. She realized that her life had shifted entirely. She was no longer a girl carrying bread to survive, she was a woman capable of transforming lives. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the neighborhood in golden hues, Sade gathered the team for a final meeting. She looked at each volunteer, each family, and spoke from the heart. "We've done more than give supplies," she said. "We've given hope. And hope is stronger than fear." The mothers nodded, children beamed, and even the fathers allowed themselves small smiles. Adiwale stood quietly beside her, his expression proud but restrained, letting her have the moment. For the first time, Sade felt fully seen, not for what she had been, but for who she had become. When they returned to the office, Adiwale handed her another folder, thicker than the last. "Plans for new initiatives," he said. "You'll oversee some of them, guide them, and continue telling the stories of the people we serve. You've earned this responsibility." Sade's hands trembled as she took the folder. She felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it made her chest ache. She thought of the coin jingling in her pouch long ago, of the bread she had balanced on her head, of the boy who had opened her heart. And she understood, with perfect clarity, that the life she had lived, every hardship, every act of kindness, had prepared her for this very moment. That evening, back in her small room, Sade didn't touch the envelope. The money no longer mattered. What mattered was the life she had stepped into, the impact she could have, the lives she could change. She opened her notebook, revisited the stories she had collected, and began planning new ways to help, to reach further, to see more deeply. As Lagos hummed outside, restless and indifferent to most, Sade felt the city's pulse differently now. She was part of its rhythm, its stories, its heartbeat. And in the quiet glow of her lantern, she whispered to the darkness, "Mama, I made it. Not just for me, but for everyone who believed kindness could matter." Sade lay down that night, her body exhausted but her spirit soaring. She had begun as a girl selling bread to survive. In 24 hours, she had stepped into a world she had never imagined, touched lives, and discovered the power within herself. She closed her eyes and dreamed, not of survival, but of transformation, knowing deep in her heart that her story, like the stories of the families she now carried with her, was only beginning. For the first time, Sade slept knowing that a single act of kindness could indeed change everything. And in Lagos, under the quiet stars, a girl who had given bread had found a life beyond her wildest dreams. Morning broke differently that day. The sun's light seeped through her window with a quiet insistence, as though it too knew something extraordinary was waiting. Sade rose slowly, her body still tired from the previous days, yet her spirit thrummed with a fierce energy she had never felt before. She glanced at the tray of bread resting quietly on the table, untouched for days. It was no longer a lifeline, it was a memory, a reminder of where she had started. Today, she carried something far greater, purpose. She dressed carefully, tucking the envelope and the card into her wrapper, along with her notebook filled with stories, ideas, and plans. Each page was a testament to the lives she had touched and the lessons she had learned. Her hands lingered on it for a moment, as though drawing strength from the collection of faces and voices she had gathered. Walking through the streets of Lagos, everything seemed sharper, clearer, as though the city itself was alive with opportunity. She noticed the small details she had once overlooked, the old man struggling to carry a heavy sack, the young girl balancing a pot of water on her head, the vendor arranging tomatoes with care. She imagined each one's story, each one's hidden struggles, and felt an unfamiliar sense of responsibility. She was no longer merely observing the city, she was part of it, and it was part of her. At the office, Adewale was waiting, as always, but this time there was a different air about him. He looked at her not just as someone being taught, but as someone who could contribute, someone whose presence mattered. "Sade," he said, "today is different. Today, you won't just witness change, you'll lead it." Her pulse quickened. Lead it? She swallowed hard, feeling both exhilaration and fear. I'll try, sir," she said quietly. He nodded. "Trying is the first step. Come with me." They drove to a community on the outskirts, a neighborhood recently devastated by storms. Homes were damaged, streets flooded, and families displaced. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and smoke from small cooking fires. Children ran barefoot through the mud, some laughing despite their hardships, others watching quietly from doorways. Mothers balanced babies on their backs, eyes alert, cautious. Fathers moved with care, checking what little they could salvage. Adewale turned to Sade. "Today, you decide what needs to happen here. You have seen, you have listened. Now, you'll act." Her heart raced. She had observed, taken notes, planned, but leading? It felt monumental. Yet, as she stepped from the car, something within her settled. She thought of the boy she had given bread to, of the families she had met, of the quiet power of noticing. And in that moment, she realized that leadership wasn't about knowing everything, it was about caring enough to do something. Sade walked through the mud with the team, assessing the needs. She organized the distribution of food, blankets, and school supplies, instructing volunteers with a steady voice she hadn't known she possessed. She spoke with mothers about rebuilding their homes, asking questions, listening to their needs, and ensuring their voices guided the team's actions. She guided children to safe spaces, watched them laugh, and reminded herself that every small gesture mattered. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Sade felt her body ache, her hands blistered from lifting supplies, her feet soaked from the mud. Yet she never stopped, never faltered. Each smile she received, each tear she helped wipe away, strengthened her resolve. She realized that her life had shifted entirely. She was no longer a girl carrying bread to survive, she was a woman capable of transforming lives. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the neighborhood in golden hues, Sade gathered the team for a final meeting. She looked at each volunteer, each family, and spoke from the heart. "We've done more than give supplies," she said. "We've given hope. And hope is stronger than fear." The mothers nodded, children beamed, and even the fathers allowed themselves small smiles. Adewale stood quietly beside her, his expression proud but restrained, letting her have the moment. For the first time, Sade felt fully seen, not for what she had been, but for who she had become. When they returned to the office, Adewale handed her another folder, thicker than the last. "Plans for new initiatives," he said. "You'll oversee some of them, guide them, and continue telling the stories of the people we serve. You've earned this responsibility." Sade's hands trembled as she took the folder. She felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it made her chest ache. She thought of the coin jingling in her pouch long ago, of the bread she had balanced on her head, of the boy who had opened her heart. And she understood, with perfect clarity, that the life she had lived, every hardship, every act of kindness, had prepared her for this very moment. That evening, back in her small room, Sade didn't touch the envelope. The money no longer mattered. What mattered was the life she had stepped into, the impact she could have, the lives she could change. She opened her notebook, revisited the stories she had collected, and began planning new ways to help, to reach further, to see more deeply. As Lagos hummed outside, restless and indifferent to most, Sade felt the city's pulse differently now. She was part of its rhythm, its stories, its heartbeat. And in the quiet glow of her lantern, she whispered to the darkness, "Mama, I made it. Not just for me, but for everyone who believed kindness could matter. Sade lay down that night, her body exhausted but her spirit soaring. She had begun as a girl selling bread to survive. In 24 hours, she had stepped into a world she had never imagined, touched lives, and discovered the power within herself. She closed her eyes and dreamed, not of survival, but of transformation, knowing deep in her heart that her story, like the stories of the families she now carried with her, was only beginning. For the first time, Sade slept knowing that a single act of kindness could indeed change everything. And in Lagos, under the quiet stars, a girl who had given bread had found a life beyond her wildest dreams.